All right, guys, what is going on? It's Halsey Schider with the Helicopter Podcast. One of my favorite things about doing the podcast is just this idea that I get to connect with so many neat people. I don't think I've ever had a guest that I didn't walk away and say, man, what a story, or what a cool person, or what a journey. And I love that about the podcast. It allows me to connect with you guys, you men and women that make this industry so awesome and so special. And I think today's guest is just that person. I'm joined by Cathy Press of Chinook Helicopters up in British Columbia, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Beautiful area, just north of me. I'm in Oregon, so you're not. I'm guessing I'll probably have to somehow get my way up there and do some flying with you guys soon, because I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that flying in British Columbia has to be some of like the nicest, most beautiful flying.
It's pretty awesome. We have gorgeous place up here and I marvel when I look over the edge 2,000 feet between my feet and I can see down into the rivers and valleys and things like that. It's awesome.
It's so cool. Well, I'd love to come and see it. Maybe we can come and shoot some fun content up there sometime with MHM or something like that. But Cathy, I've been talking with your team and getting this organized, and been able to kind of read through your bio and your history. Um, I guess the best way that I could kind of, when I'm reading it, excuse my language, but it seems like you're a bit of a badass. You in this industry, you're really a pioneering aviator, and you're just doing awesome and cool things. So I'm so excited to delve into that. And I have to say that uh, no knock on my previous guests, but they don't always have such great backgrounds. And I'm loving the background. What are we looking at there?
Well, I'm in one of our offices and we're featuring our Bell 47s. This was an old picture that was given to me, and it has about 4 Bell 47s that are leaving the Bell factory when they were brand new in the 1960s. One of the helicopters happens to be in our hangar. It's still flying today, and so we tell people about it when they walk through our office.
Golly, that is incredible. I was um I was at an operator in Oregon, Hillsborough Aviation. It's where I learned how to fly back in the day, and they don't own the flight school anymore. But we were there. I was visiting with Max. I did a podcast, and he had, I think, I don't know, 4 Hueys in the hangar for firefighting. And the aircraft have been around for so long, and they're still out there flying. It's just so incredible. I don't have any 47 experience. I don't even know if I've ever even touched one in real life. Tell me about flying the Bell 47. What kind of
Yeah.
experience you have in that, and what flying that iconic machine is all about?
Well, I have a lot of hours in the Bell 47. I probably have about 8 to 10,000 hours in it, and
That's it?
yeah, I started
Cathy, this is the Helicopter Podcast. We need people with more hours than 10 things. That's
I have a
incredible.
lot of hours in a Bell 47. The very first time I was about 15 years old, I went up, probably only about 30 feet in the air, and the next time I was probably in the same year, 15, and I went probably, or a circuit. I was given the cyclic and I thought, "Oh my goodness, this is really sensitive," and I had to think about it for about a year before I started my training. So that was my first instance, and with the 47, I mean, there's been years that I have flown personally, probably 1,200 hours a year, and obviously I'm not doing that much flying anymore, but, I really, really enjoy the Bell 47s. If you've
Yeah,
ever flown some of the Bell mediums, like the 205, the 212, they do have similar handling characteristics with their weight and the rotor head system is similar, so
yeah, it's so cool. I would love to. Maybe that's my pitch to you, Cathy. Is I would like to come up and check out the Bell 47. It's just such an iconic machine. So one of those aircraft that's behind you there in the picture is one that you still have in your hangar that's still
Yeah,
actively
I think
flying.
it's one of the little more forward on the forward side here, and it's Kilo Golf Uniform is the registration. So it has it in the picture, and so we still have the same registration on it. So it's kinda neat, the history, and I can open up the logbooks and they go back to the 1950s. I can pick out
Wow.
people's names that are in the helicopter industry. It's sort of a diary of sorts, many of their logbooks.
Man, that's so cool. Just it's a flying piece of history, really, at this point. And to see, everything, of course, that's coming out with helicopters now, not just with avionics, but I think HAI this year we were seeing a lot new innovation with new things coming out, and there's been a lot of changes, but by and large, actually, the helicopter industry hasn't changed a ton, and
No, no.
one would argue that maybe that's maybe a bit of a problem, and so I think that there's now a lot of people that are coming into the space and trying to innovate, which is good and bad. I think it has its issues as well as it's kind of clogging up certification and things like that. But it is wild to think that these aircraft are still flying out there. Similar to my story, I started flying airplanes. I learned it in 1946 Aranca Champ when I was 15, and I soloed, which I believe you also had your solo on your birthday or near your birthday, at least when you were 16. Was I'm guessing like me, this aviation bug hit you young, or was there someone in the family? Just kind of talk to
Yes.
me about that.
So my dad flew float planes, and he had a float plane when I was a kid. I remember going down to the airport with him, and he let me start flying it and start landing on the water and this sort of thing. And I remember someone came up to me at the airport and said, "Oh, well, you couldn't possibly. Float plane's easy to fly because a wheel plane you actually have to touch down at a certain point on the runway, but the float plane, you got the whole river." So anyway, when I came back, I said, "Okay, the end of the dock, that's where I'm gonna touch down." I was only about 13 or so. So I said, "Make sure you're standing there watching." And so that was part of the challenge, is to make sure that I would touch down at that spot, which I did. And I think that's always been what's really drawn me to aviation is it's been challenging. It never stops with the challenges. And I think that really piqued my interest even at a young age. I went solo on my 16th birthday in an airplane, and I ended up going solo while I was 16 in the helicopter, so that the day I turned 17, I had both the airplane and the helicopter license issued. And Transport Canada were wonderful. They On the Friday, my birthday was actually on a Sunday, they ended up giving out the licenses 2 days early so that I could technically use them right on the day on a Sunday to have them issued. So,
That's
yeah, that
incredible.
was pretty cool, yeah.
All right, we just were working through a couple little technical difficulties and we've decided to change up. So if you're watching us, which you should, by the way, be watching our YouTube channel, The Helicopter Podcast. If you're watching us, you'll see a little change that Cathy is no longer wearing a headset, and we just think it's a little bit better audio. But uh, we were talking about, you beat me, by the way. So I thought I was cool because I soloed an airplane on my 16th birthday. Well, you had your license for both fixed wing and helicopter at the age of 17. So it's pretty incredible. Uh, what was that? Do you look back at your early flying and feel a little like apprehensive of like I can't believe I was flying at that age? Because I do.
I don't know. I guess when I see some young people, I'm thinking, "I was that age, really?" I don't know if I really look back apprehensively. It was at the time, it seemed all like it was in normal time. I know that I've given advice to people. They talk about kids that are younger and they come to me, and I always support that. And my dad, he had actually leased a Cessna 172 for me while I was 17 to time build. You usually have to do 100 hours of time building. I was extremely popular. Just to say, all of the guys at the Safeway that packed the groceries, they all knew who I was, and
Of
I was
course.
always giving rides out to people. I tended to fly the airplane in the first, I would say, from the time I was about 17 through to my early 20s. I flew the airplane a little more, and I kind of almost had the trajectory to go toward the airlines, I realized that a lot of people around me absolutely wanted to be airline pilots. They could taste it, they could breathe it, they wanted it so badly, and I didn't really I enjoyed flying. I really would have loved to have flown a 747. I didn't necessarily want to do the job as a problem. And so that drew me more in my mid-20s toward doing more with the helicopter. And so then I started flying with the helicopter and I went into the fairly quickly into the instructional side. The instructional side, I wanted to be a teacher. When I was, I don't know, 13, between 10 and 13, I would have loved to have been a teacher. So I guess I kind of compounded everything together with flying and teaching and a lot of the things I really enjoy.
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, I never even thought about helicopters. It was always going to be airplanes. My dream, I saw Top Gun at a young age, and I watched it every day for 15 years straight. So that was my trajectory. I really wanted to fly jets, and I attempted that path for a bit, and unfortunately, it's a numbers game. Probably not just for the U.S., but also other countries, Canada included. Of what kind of flight slots are available when you are ready to go and go down that path. And unfortunately, there just wasn't. And so I felt dejected because I liked flying, but airplanes to me were always just like a little. I even remember on a solo cross country one time thinking, man, this is kind of boring, and kind of feeling sad. Like, man, I've wanted to do this my whole life, and I felt just a little. It's probably like the ADHD. Of course, I don't have that, but if I did have it, it's probably what it would be like. And helicopters just happened to be a birthday present for a demo flight, and when I touched the controls of a helicopter for the first time, I was like, oh, that is flying. And that's what I always kind of tell people the difference, people that are not into aviation, that a helicopter is like an extension of you. And you kind of put it on like a pair of pants, and you can feel it, and when you're flying it, it's like the closest you can get to actually flying yourself. So, I think it's fairly neat. eh, eh, I'm always fascinated, just to hear why people get into it. It sounds like your dad obviously kind of perked you into aviation. Um, and it kind of sounds like a self realization of going into the helicopter route. So you start teaching. I would love just to hear a little bit more about your early years of flying helicopters, what you were doing, what you thought your trajectory at that time was. And then, of course, I want to walk into what you're doing now and your business, and go to that route. So
Okay.
you have the floor.
Well, I guess the early days, as I said, I was doing more airplane flying initially, and I had instructed. I'd worked my way up through a class one instructor, and at that point, I started doing more helicopter flights where I was taking news cameras out, going up local shake logging, things that were happening in the lower mainland, dropping people off, tree planting, this type of flying. And to be honest, there wasn't a lot of women in the helicopter business in the when was this? This was like in the mid-90s. There was very few. And I'm not sure I ever was that keen on being 2 weeks in a camp and being around a bunch of guys that needed a bath. So so I guess that's probably, why my world started to I started to create my world a little bit around myself. Somebody said to me once, "Were you ever gonna be in the boys' club?" And I think I really recognized at a young age I was never gonna be in the boys' club. So I've since said I started my own club. And the business became a little bit of that. I guess that I'd already instructed on the airplane. Probably I had 2,000 hours or so instructing on the airplane and about 3,000 hours total somewhere in my mid-20s. And then, as I said, I did some light helicopter work, and then I went into the flight instruction. I didn't realize at the time, but when I did my flight instructor rating, the fellow was out from Ottawa, and I had said to him, "Well, how many women have their flight instructor rating?" And he said to me, "Well, there's one." And I was said, "Oh, well, who is she? She back in Ontario?" Because I hadn't heard of anyone. And he said, "No, it's you. Here, congratulations." Oh, right. So that was a surprise. Honestly, nobody was too worried about it at that time. And I sort of did my thing. I worked with different instructors, and obviously, a lot of my career, I have to thank all of the people at that time that really helped me and took me under their wing. A lot of those people have since, retired or passed away, and it's odd to be all of a sudden in the older group when I was always the youngest person, but that's where we are today. The flight school, really from about 97, I've owned the flight school here, and it's become sort of my life. When I took it over, there was 3 helicopters. Today, we have almost, 29 aircraft. So it's changed and morphed, and I've had to change and morph in everything I do, and sometimes the my biggest challenge flying is being in the office and then having to run out the door, and even though if I'm not that current, do some full-on auto rotations and the complex emergency procedures when I've been more or less sitting in my office. So that today is probably one of my more challenging things I have to do with flying is pull those things off.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly you kind of can lose it, right, from disuse. I don't fly full time anymore, and I haven't flown actually for a long time. I'm working on that because I feel like, man, if I host a podcast called the Helicopter Podcast, I should probably fly them more. Um, uh, Disclaimer: of course, I have a vast history of flying helicopters, so I guess I'm qualified. But I'm hoping to do more and more flying. But I recently was doing a training flight, and the training flight was it was at the safety course for Robinson, so it's like a higher complex. You're adjusting your airspeed and you're trying to hit the spot and you're doing things that used to be really easy. I did it for 3 years straight at Hillsborough, teaching full downs, not a big deal. And man, I was like white knuckling everything. I was it was a daunting task to just get back into that seat, and so it's hard when you start wearing the business hat to also get back into the helicopter, and that recency is so important. I do want to go back. I don't I don't like to bring a huge emphasis on like male and female because at the end of the day, we're all aviators, right? It shouldn't
Exactly.
necessarily have to be a conversation, but something that I've realized in my time of being in the industry and being on the podcast, it's obviously a lot more men in aviation. I don't think there's that secret. And I think one of the neat things that we can do on the podcast is give access to young people, not just young boys, but now young girls, of this idea that hey, you can also be a pilot, right? It doesn't there's not a check mark on your 8110. I don't know what you call them. We call them 8130s. I don't know what you call them there, but there's not a check mark saying, are you a guy? Uh, so I'm just kind of interested for our female audience. What has it been like navigating a male dominated industry? What's been great about it, and what are some of the challenges that you face of just the fact that you're female?
Well, I personally have had really a great experience. I have found that the people, for the most part, have been very supportive. I have had men do, outstanding things and go to ask on my behalf for different authorities that I have been able to obtain over the years. They've taken me under their wing, and actually, I've been supported a lot. I don't think that I ever have had a lot of energy into the fact that I'm male or female. I think that I've always showed up and just tried to be helpful. I think actually the female part for me is that I'm a little girly and I never was excited about going out to camps for too long. And I'm slightly, it's probably me that actually is the reason that I've actually sort of stayed with the flight training because I enjoy the teaching and probably because of the fact that I wasn't looking to go to really remote areas for long periods of time. And yet I really enjoy flying the helicopter. So that side of it, it wasn't because of being female or male that really predicted that. I think it was my own personality and my own desires and wants. And as I said, I've had a lot of support from everybody. And one thing, I mean, if you're a girl and there's not very many, you feel a little more self-conscious. You feel like there's a little bit more weight that everybody's going to talk about you or know what's happening. I certainly felt that way. However, I think that was really self-induced. I don't think that was from any external source.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, and I'm glad that you said that because by and large, obviously, I have not experienced the industry from that perspective, but I've been lucky enough to work with women, train women, be trained by women, and it all kind of seems like it's never it's never been a thing really that I've seen. I've heard some comments before. I'm like, okay, well, that dude's old. He should probably, he's on his way out to retire. So I guess it is different time, whatever. But by and large, it seems like as pilots, we've always just kind of supported each other, and it's more like you said, just showing up, right? Like, do people want to be around you? Uh, if the answer is yes, then they're going to like you no matter who you are, as long as you work hard and you do what you say you're going to do and you're going to do it and things like that. And I think that's important. I think that, again, the reason I bring it up is it's just, I think it's neat for young women to see women like yourself that have been so successful within this industry, a bit of a trailblazer. Do you consider yourself at all a trailblazer?
I don't know if I consider myself a trailblazer, honestly, but it's funny, an image that came to mind is I think I was about 15 or 16 years old, and I used to love to run out and try to wash people's windows when they'd land and wait for the fuel truck and be helpful. And I love to sew, and I like to sew fabrics and lace, and I would usually go out in this, sort of big dress with like a lace blouse when I was 16 years old. So I probably never really fit the part. And when I look back, I'm sure a lot of the pilots are like, "Oh my gosh, what's she doing?" But anyway, everyone always appreciated what I did for them. They always appreciated the help. And I think that that is one thing that, sort of I feel like I'm older. I feel like it's a generational thing, but in the '80s, a lot of people didn't have work. A lot of people, you sort of appreciated every sort of advance that you got. So there was that mentality to sort of do things for people and give customer service support. I know for me, that has helped me a great deal, both in my beginning of my career as I have run a business and the things I've done. So I'm thankful for actually being in that time of the world where you sort of had to, I guess, work for things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. I want to touch just a little bit more on one of the things you said, but real fast, we're just going to take a quick break for our sponsor.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical Helicasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
All right, thanks to our sponsors for making the podcast possible. Hanging out with Cathy today from Chinook Helicopters up in British Columbia. Again, I got to get up there. I'm guessing it's just absolutely gorgeous. I've only been there one time. I was in a church camp as a kid, and the church camp ended up in they called it Malibu, which I always thought was funny because it was actually in British Columbia, and very different than what I kind of imagined of what Malibu is. But it was, I even remember being young and going there and being like, wow, this place is incredibly beautiful.
Aren't you just giving something away about yourself? I think that often kids that are hard to handle go to Malibu
Oh,
so they can come back all happy.
yeah. No, actually, I was a good kid.
Okay.
I was a pretty good kid. It was through Young Life, so it was like it's an organization, I think, to try to encourage kids to
Oh, yeah.
find religion. But that was my experience of
It was
BC, and
beautiful
I
there.
haven't been since. So I really want to go. I find that it's a really funny story what you're talking about of being flight instructor numero one on the female side. I'm guessing that there's more female flight instructors in Canada now, but beyond that, you're also an examiner. What's the numbers like for examiners up there that are female examiners?
Well, so far, I became an examiner approximately 22 years ago, and it's still, I'm the only examiner 22 years later. So, there's more coming. There are more coming. Yeah, for helicopters, there's probably under 10 female instructors in Canada. So it's not a big number.
That's crazy. Well, hopefully, as time goes on and things, social media is good and bad, but I think one of the good things about it is it shows people doing cool things in helicopters, and some of those people happen to be female, and they're doing really fun stuff. And podcasts like this, where we get to connect with people like you, Just I think will hopefully help kind of keep pushing the industry in that direction. So you said 1997. You did you purchase an existing flight school?
Did. Yes, actually, I did. I purchased an existing flight school, which was actually one that my dad had. I went to the bank and took the funds and started from there, and there was 3 aircraft, and I guess I've been sort of picking away, and it's been building slowly over the years, and we're up to about 29 aircraft now. So
And
it's
and from that 29 aircraft, what does that fleet look like?
6 Bell 47s, 6 R-44s, 2 Bell 206s, 2 Bell 505s, 11 172s, and 3 Diamond DA-42s.
Wow, that's incredible. That's quite the fleet. What and you're training in the Bell 47 still?
Yes, yes, we've found it a very successful platform. We've found that we have excellent habits that come out of power management when people are learning to do approaches and going into confined areas. So we've really enjoyed that
Oh
platform
my
for
goodness, that is
yeah.
so cool. Now, how does it look like? Let's say that I come in and I say, "Hey, Kathy, I want to be a professional helicopter pilot, specifically in Canada."
Mhm.
And you have a fleet of, Bell 47s, you have some Robinson, you have 206, you have the 505s. What kind of training curriculum would you recommend for me? How does it
Usually
look like?
Yeah, and usually at Chinook Helicopters, what we're usually doing is the first 50 hours are on the Bell 47. So we get the person solo out to do cross country sandbars, solo exercises. Then we transition them to the to the Robinson 44, and then they do high mountains. They do creeks, rivers, valleys, advanced procedures, long lining, and confined area operations. And then they go into the uh, Bell Tool 6 if they want to do endorsements. In Canada, it's 100 hours for the commercial license, as opposed to the United States, it's 150. So it's often 100 hours with a 50/50 license and then endorsements. And each aircraft in Canada, you have to be endorsed on type.
Yeah, that's in fact, I was with some Canadian friends recently. We do a lot of work up in Canada. Love Canada, big fan. Uh, I was up in the Ontario area, had a great time, did a lot of cool flying. I must say that you guys have way cooler like pilot license. Like it's almost like a passport book, uh, with the different endorsements and things like that. Now, are you having to get like if let's say I'm endorsed on the 206, is that something that you're having to do every single year?
No, no. Once you have an endorsement, it stays on your license. And if you were to come with a Bell 206 endorsement, 10 hours pilot in command, it could be brought over to the Canadian license if you had one.
Oh, you
So you
can
can
bring
ship
that
them
on
back
in.
and forth. Yeah, yeah.
That's really neat too. That it seems like your students are getting really a diverse set of training skills. One thing that maybe you can help me confirm or dispel is I know that here in the United States, similar to my path, I go to flight school. Mine was all in the R-22, and from that, then I started teaching. I became a certified flight instructor, and I taught for about 1,000 hours. I've always been told that in Canada, it might be a little bit different where you go, you get your commercial license, and then you actually go out into the industry and work the industry, and then you come back as an instructor. Is that really the case?
Yes, and the reason there's a logistical reason for that. 100 hours is the commercial license, and then to become a flight instructor, you're required to have 250 hours PIC. So that means that you need to have probably over 300 hours. So therefore, people don't pay to go from the commercial license. They go out to work, and unlike a Part 135 in the United States, there's no minimum time requirement. So usually people go out of a Canadian license into a like a Part 135 type of company, which here is a 703 is as how it's termed. And they usually work for about a year in a ground position in an operational position. And then they have a pilot proficiency check done and they start in whatever work that company starts people out in. So that's the normal process. So by the time somebody considers being an instructor, they're usually looking to be home with a family, or they're looking to retire, or they're looking to sort of give back in their instructional career. So therefore, I think there's under 70 instructors in Canada
Oh, wow.
today. Yeah.
That it's really wild, and I've actually always thought that that was the better, way to do it, uh, because it's weird to have 200 hours and then start teaching, and seems dangerous and slightly scary looking back at my time. By and large, even in the United States, the accidents are still fairly limited. So it doesn't seem like it's like an overwhelming safety issue, but it just has always made more sense to like, hey, go work, understand the industry, and come back. And in fact, some of the best instruction that I've ever got was from someone that left and worked for 10 years and then they came back into the flight training environment. You learn just a ton from those people. And so I always thought that Canada does things just a little bit better, uh, in that aspect. What can a newly minted Canadian commercial pilot expect to maybe do for their first commercial flying job once they've kind of paid their way through working on the ground and things like that?
I would say if you were to say, you could pick all different companies, but let's just say that it was a single pilot operation. It would probably fly a Bell 206. It would probably be to do either power line or pipeline or some sort of a reconnaissance type of work. It might be dropping tree planters off. So it would be whatever that function of that company sort of said. So usually in a Bell Long Ranger or Bell Jet Ranger, there are some R-44 positions, and then there are some Medevac co-pilot positions. So it's a little bit all over the place. It depends on where someone starts and what company they begin with. And it's quite a cross section.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I kind of always enjoyed that idea. I felt like I had to chase that first job for so long because really the way we do it is, 1,000 hours gets you that ticket into flying a 206 or, 407 or something like that. So I definitely think that Canada is doing it right in that aspect. As far as it goes with training, again, I'm very familiar here in the States. We have, 61 training, 141. Is there like a 141 style equivalent to helicopter flight training in Canada, like following a syllabus that's been approved by, say, in this case, Transport Canada?
Yeah. I mean, Transport Canada, essentially, the way that the operating certificate system works is kind of a hybrid of like a 161 to or a 61, I guess it is, to a 141. It's you always have to be you have higher standards than say just the 61 and maybe not quite as high as the 141. So there's sort of a hybrid in the middle. And actually, Transport Canada has been recently looking into adopting the ICAO and your EASA format of an ATO, which is the approved training organization. So actually, just a month or actually 2 weeks ago, I just had a team from Transport Canada out here on a pilot project to look at how we can sort of be going into a pilot project for an ATO for Canada on the rotary side.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I'm actually not super familiar with ATO. That's a
Well,
new
it's
term.
yeah, so what it can do is you put in a course together, and if you feel that you can do better in certain areas of a course, you can train to competency standard, and you have alternate means of compliance for regulatory standards. So it can mean that you can develop courses to follow what industry is asking for, potentially.
That's interesting. So, could it be a thing where you could like train in Canada, but then also have like a YASA type conversion or something like that?
Exactly, exactly. Recently, we've partnered with a company in Europe where a person can do part of their training in Europe and then part of their training in Canada, so they can end up with an EASA Canadian license and actually move that into an FAA license as well. So it makes it so that it's far easier to adopt these different training courses that may be needed by certain companies along the way. So it's pretty exciting, actually.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. I know that when I went to flight school, even though it was in the United States, I was like the minority being from the US. Most of the students were from Europe, and when I was training, because I think that in Europe it was so much more expensive. And then these poor guys or gals had to do all their training here, get their hours, then go back to Europe, spend another 20 plus thousand to do their conversions and take their tests. It never made a whole a lot of sense to me, but I guess sometimes the government bureaucracy doesn't always make sense. I guess that's kind of the thing.
Well, for years, we've seen about 30% of the business here usually be international business. I counted it up. I think we had dealt with something like 80 countries over the last, how many, I guess, 40 years. So you really meet some interesting people from all different places. And when you travel, you can usually go back and see these people and catch up with them. And it's actually a really cool part of the business.
I totally agree. We were in Spain for European Rotors, and it felt like a Hillsborough Aviation reunion with all the Europeans that I went to school with. Just so much fun. Do you have a rough number of how many pilots you've created through Chinook Helicopters, both airplanes and helicopters?
I don't actually have a rough number. At one time, I went out and I was asked to be a part of a team that was auditing some paperwork, and I realized that approximately 30% of all the pilot files I was looking I'd at some point had a touch point where I'd flown with people in the BC area. So I thought it was kind of neat. It's a small business, and everyone does know everyone, and actually it's pretty neat that way. I
Yeah.
don't have an exact number. I think over at some point, the flight tests that I had performed were somewhere in around the 700 mark. I don't know exactly what that is.
And I know that you are a pilot examiner. Are you an examiner for both airplanes and helicopters?
I am actually. I do private commercial on the helicopter or airplane, sorry. And on the helicopter private commercial, IFR and instructor.
Wow. I and now in Canada, are you allowed to do the check rides with students that have trained at your school?
You can't have done yes, for my school, yes. You have to have not instructed, you have to be less than 50% of their instruction that you're involved in.
Sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So do you still actively do a lot of the check rides?
I do, and I float around depending like you we're in a real crisis of shortage of pilots right now. We're feeling it on all sides of the market. I find that I sort of float in and I do airplane rides sometimes and sometimes helicopter. Right now, I'm the only one doing IFR rides on the helicopter. So it changes depending on who's in the area. So I do quite a number of, I think I was up over about 130 flight tests last year.
Wow, that's incredible. I You know, I know I've talked with other DPEs, designated pilot examiners down here, and they're not always like super happy to give me like the gouge. But one thing that I always felt interesting was like this idea of if I was a DPE, it's so hard. I feel like it's so hard to, yeah, you have your PTS, your practical test standards, or your equivalent up in Canada, but it's like, I feel like there has to be a little bit of flexibility sometimes. I guess first question is how do you approach a check ride? Let's say it's a commercial or a private even. How do you what kind of intensity do you set? Do kind of
I try to have less intensity. I usually walk into a room and I say, tell me about how you got to this point or why you're in aviation. One time I was really taken aback. It was an airplane private flight test. And I said to the candidate, I said, hi, and why'd you decide to become a pilot? He said, you. And I said, what? And he said, yeah. 15 years ago, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago, you landed in my yard. You picked up myself and my sister in a helicopter. I never forgot it. And so I decided to get my airplane private license. I was really taken aback. Anyway, regardless, I try to make people feel as comfortable as they can. It's really hard from the pilot examiner's point of view when you know things are starting to go off the rails to not have your body language show. I think that that's a challenge to sort of really stay impartial, especially if you're starting to get the feeling that things aren't going too well.
Yeah, that would be very difficult. What are some of the common things that you see where it seems like students are struggling? Is there kind of a specific area on the ground portion and the flight portion that's kind of like, man, we should maybe focus more on this in training?
Well, actually, in the last few years, I just was discussing this with the fellow that came out from Ottawa. Um, Definitely, helicopter pilots' understanding of how airplane circuits work sometimes can be, certainly in Canada, The rules are that you can conform to or avoid the circuit. And so the fixed wing pilot always understands the circuit because they've grown up in it. The helicopter student has to understand it in order to avoid it. And sometimes, they don't always understand what the airplanes are doing. So maybe that's an area that sometimes can be weak on the ground.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, and especially if it's not like an emphasis. One of the things that I've been talking about recently, I had Nick Sinopoli on from he's the gentleman that created the Icarus device. It's like the view limiting device.
Yes.
And one thing that kind of got me thinking when I was talking to him was this idea that I don't think that we do a great job, specifically on the private side for helicopters in the States, of really explaining and teaching and getting used to this idea of like inadvertent IMC. Obviously we want to stay out of the clouds if we're in a VFR helicopter. And most of the time, if you do the right pre-flight planning and you check your sources and you can kind of avoid that usually. But sometimes, I'm guessing even in Canada more often, weather can change, things can happen, and I feel like there's not a ton of emphasis. We train engine failures constantly, and that's actually a very low percentage possibility, and it makes sense. It's a complex maneuver, and I get that. In Canada, is there an emphasis on on this idea of inadvertent IMC?
Um, I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say also prior to 1989, there was no IFR training whatsoever completed on a commercial license. In 1989 and today, there's 10 hours of instrument training, and it was mostly because 73% of all fatalities were IMC conditions, basically like a CFIT type of
Yeah, of course.
accident. And that's what it was brought in. And it was to sort of look at that. Now, I mean, I have my own thoughts on that. I have flown with people that had zero instrument training. They had learned to fly prior to 1989, and that I've also flown with people afterwards. And I have a mixed opinion on that. Sometimes the people that had no training whatsoever are completely concerned and they want to stay out of clouds completely. And then sometimes because you've given somebody a little bit of training, they actually have a level where they feel that they can take it on. So I'm not sure if that's helpful. So I know for myself, when I start a training program, the first thing I say is we're going to give you some fundamental, excuse me, things that will help you for instrument flying. Don't think that this is in any way something that will actually get you out of a cloud, especially as you've pointed out before, we're in the British Columbia area. Even if you were to successfully be able to fly straight and level in a cloud, right behind it, you're going to find granite. And so it won't extend your life.
Yeah, no, 100%. I want to touch a little bit more on that, but we're just going to take a quick break for our sponsor.
Thank you to our sponsor, Vertical Aviation International. With 80 years of service under our belts, the helicopter industry continues to innovate. We're growing with new aircraft and technology coming to the flight line and hangar. The industry's association is changing too. Helicopter Association International, or HAI, is now VAI, Vertical Aviation International. VAI unites the industry and advocates for you. Visit verticalavi.org/benefits to see how joining VAI connects you with your vertical community. Together, let's power up.
All right, thank you to our sponsors, and we are chatting with Cathy. We're having a good time. Anytime I talk to someone that's in Canada or another country, it's always fascinating to kind of hear how you guys are training and doing things. And I agree with you. I think that it's a fine line because I think you definitely want to train IMC, inadvertent IMC specifically, but you don't want to give a false idea that training is their ticket to actually go and practice that in real life or push their weather making decision, while they're on the ground and pre-flight planning. But I guess my caveat to it is, even when I was flying air medical, a VFR program here in the States, we had a lot of steps in between us, taking a flight. And even you could do everything right and still potentially pop into the soup. I think they had about 10 IMC events a year. I was always really conservative, so I never really been close to being in that situation. But I do think that it's something of an emphasis of at least knowing what to do if you get into that situation. But by all means, stay out of the clouds if you shouldn't be there.
Yes, absolutely. I often find that I tell a story about myself, and I was 17 years old. I was in a 172, and I was only traveling about, I don't know, maybe 10 miles away to the next airport. And I'd been asked to pick up a box from the control tower at the next airport. I felt really important because someone had asked me to do that.
It's a
So here
mission.
I am, the weather's getting worse, and it's getting worse, and I'm going lower. I'm actually thinking to myself, I have about 5 hours of training. I think I know what to do. And about that time, I'm thinking I better turn around. And in the turn, I actually, as I'm turning around, enter a cloud. And next thing I know, I look at the attitude indicator and it's sitting down and the altimeter is widening down. And I pull back and I'm only about 200 feet above ground when I pull up. So I'm 17. I fly back carefully. I land, I pull the mixture back and I go like jelly. And I tell that story to students because of the fact that I knew in my head at the time that I knew it was getting worse, but I also knew I had some amount of training. So therefore, I should be able to handle this. And what I realized later when I had an instrument rating and I had done a lot more of it, I had no idea what I was doing. So I think that's what I try to pass along to people until you've actually had an instrument rating, tried to make decisions, and you're ready to enter into the cloud. You have absolutely no business even thinking that you can really get yourself out of it. That's my
100%. And
that's what I try
I
to
love
pass along.
that. I do love that too, because I think part of the training should be maybe more emphasis on recognizing that you're going down a path that maybe you don't want to be going down anymore. Visibility is starting to decrease. You're Whether you're making the decision or you're subconsciously starting to descend, that should be a cue of like, do I want to be here? It's almost like settling with power, right? It's like one of those ideas of you really should recognize the symptoms, the signs, and how you get into it, and situations where it might happen quicker or faster, so you can avoid that. It's like knowing that just to not even get into it in the first place. So it's very interesting. Transitioning thoughts here back to your business and being a businesswoman and being very successful, clearly. How did you scale your business from 3 aircraft to now 29 aircraft? What has that process been like? What are some of the hurdles that you've encountered? What do you love about being an entrepreneur and a business owner? And what are things that are just very challenging?
Well, the first thing is I love being an entrepreneur and a business owner because I never know what opportunities lie around the corner. And I think that's what kind of keeps me always engaged. I never know if a phone call is going to mean going to some other part of the world. I never know what opportunity they'll bring, and I never know what will be around the corner. So I know for sure that it's the unknown that I really enjoy. I also dislike the unknown because it's difficult to always handle. Um, what is it that I guess that really it was just a slow progressing growth. It's adding aircraft. I've always been very fiscally conservative. I had a bank loan initially that I paid off, and I've been very careful to try to always maintain the company with a low debt ratio, just because of the fact that I recognize that aviation can be very cyclical. It can go up and it can go down. And I don't want to be, I've always felt it's a little bit like musical chairs, and you don't want to have the music stop and not have a chair to sit on. So
Totally.
that's always been I've had that ingrained from me at a young age. And so I've always run the business that way.
Yeah, it's so important. I think that there's this idea that like more debt to scale and scale quick and go and have your exit strategy. I mean, I think in some spaces like tech or whatnot, it works really well. But I think in aviation, specifically being an operator, I think we learned. I'm sure you learned maybe in 2008 and then again in 2020 during COVID, when things shut down. If you have a lot of debt, the bank is still calling, right? You're still having to, they still want to their payment. So that's, I think it's really sound advice to, that's how I run my business too. It's always been kind of a crawl, walk, run mentality. Uh, I love being debt free and not taking on debt just to think that I need to go any bit faster. Just the other idea of having 29 aircraft is there's so much logistics involved in that. Uh, Holding aircraft back because they're coming up on an inspection and flying this aircraft more and doing this and doing that. How have you been able to manage that musical chair, that logistic nightmare, uh, now by having 29 aircraft?
I'm gonna say fantastic people. I learned a long time ago that I can't do it myself. And, there's quotes like, "You need the right people on the bus," and things like that, from good to great. I think that all of those things, I certainly don't do it myself. And I'm definitely the first to admit that I know probably the least amount about some of the things that are going on. And I think that's a key is to actually, n- play, know your strengths and then, hire your weaknesses. Don't try to be good at everything that you can't do and don't try to beat yourself up for what you're not good at. That would be my takeaway from that.
Yeah, you definitely have to bring in the right people.
Mhm.
I've had recent conversations talking about that. How, sometimes when you're the owner, you get some of like the quarterback effect where you're the person in the spotlight. You're the person on the podcast. You're the face, uh, which is important. That the company needs that person. They need that face. But so much of a company is the men and women that make it up. That help you and buy into you, right? I have this idea with my employees of like they have to buy into me and my vision to
Yeah.
execute it, and
You're
it's so
absolutely
important.
right. You're absolutely right. And I think everyone here is committed to having people be pilots and help them get jobs in the industry and help them be good at what they do. I think we have a pretty committed team right from the beginning to the end. And that makes a huge difference. You're absolutely right. The buy in is super important.
So currently, what does a day in the life look like? Let's say it's Monday morning. What does your day look like from beginning to going home at the end of the night?
Well, it can really vary. I find I do step into a lot of different roles. So whoever's away or whoever isn't here, I tend to be that person that often moves into that spot. If everything is going great, I probably walk in and deal with different emails. I often will do some type of a flight test. As of lately, I usually fly helicopters, but I'm just getting current on a CJ3 jet.
Nice.
So I've been doing some flights across the United States on that. So that's been my most recent uh, challenge, if you will.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
fun. It's fun to challenge yourself, right? To put yourself back into positions to keep learning, to always be learning. It's kind of cliche to say, but it's so true. It's fun to go out and get out of your comfort zone a little bit and get there. Uh, is Chinook Helicopters primarily flight training? Do you guys have other operations that
Primarily.
you do?
We do, we do somewhat where we support maintenance and sales of aircraft, and we primarily training. We do have a charter license. We're able to operate that. However, primarily we're in the training business. And we're the largest actually in Canada on the rotary flight training in what we do.
That's incredible. And I know that recently you have been in collaboration with Bell.
Mhm.
And I guess, are you guys now in like a approved reseller for the 505?
Yeah, we're very excited about that. Actually, just you asked me what I do in a day. I just was out in a Bell 505 off to one of the Gulf Islands to have lunch with a potential owner, and it was really a great, fun, beautiful day to do that. So we're actually very excited about doing that with working with Bell.
That's so cool. I don't have a ton of stick time in the 505. I've sold a couple myself on the used side. I don't do anything new. Uh, and I've been on a couple inspection flights where I'm part of the pre-buy and I'm just kind of being there because I want to fly. Actually, it's my excuse. I was doing important things, of course, but really I just want to fly. What is it about the 505 that you really like?
I really like that it has a lot of performance. I like that it for a personal helicopter, It is very simple it's very hard to have a hot start because it's a FADEC start system. You can load everything up, you can go flying, and it's a very powerful aircraft that is simplistic and at the same time very simple to fly. I think of myself in, I don't know, 10 plus years, and maybe I'm retired or maybe I'm semi-retired, and I'd like to have a Bell 505 that I jump into and on the weekends go where I want to go. I realize that there's a capital expense to the aircraft. However, I've always seen that when you spend money on aircraft, you get it out later in the future. So really it's just another place to park your money. And as we've seen inflation, we see that not necessarily having cash is a good investment either. So that's what I see for myself in the future.
That's cool. Yeah, I wouldn't mind zipping around a 505 or really any helicopter. I think owning a helicopter is hopefully in my near future. It's kind of one of the goals that I've set. Again, being so connected to the helicopter industry, but not flying all the time feels kind of weird to me. So it's like I need to step up my game. And yeah, the 505 it does seem like a very neat platform at Heli Expo. Obviously, a couple different aircraft on display, and I was talking to one of the Bell reps of just the different mission profiles. Obviously, great for personal use. It's getting into the law enforcement sector. It's a great patrol aircraft,
Mhm.
and just a nice, good, just like what you'd expect from a Bell product. Yeah, a two bladed Bell product, of course, of just that sturdiness, that stableness. Uh, it felt very similar to flying like a fancier Long Ranger.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I've just recently moved to an area right next to an airport. I could easily put a two plate or a two, bladed helicopter into the hangar. And so, for all those reasons, I'm very excited about. We have a network of people that are enthusiastic to have an easy button, if you will, where they train the aircraft, they can maintain it, and they can fly it themselves, and they can meet up. We have a couple of people that like to go up on Sundays and they call it helicopter church. And they go up on tops of mountains and things like
Do
that.
they
So,
go? Do they go to Malibu?
you know, actually, very close to there.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. There's a fellow that I know that has a place up there and hosts people to come up to his place. It's very near Malibu. You can see it actually from where he is.
Yeah, that'd be absolutely gorgeous, and that's something cool about the 505, and really all helicopters compared to airplanes is the visibility. I love just what you can. It's almost like your personal little space needle of being able to have so much vision and see so much. I think it's one of the really cool parts of helicopters. Uh, right now, pretty. You said that you're seeing like a downturn of or a need for pilots. What do you think the reason is for that? What are we seeing right now in the industry that's causing that?
Well, I expect, remember how we talked about in the 80s and 90s, it was challenging, and we've heard about baby boomers. I think that, I don't know if you're into the Generation X or what have you, being overshadowed by a large group of people that had basically come into the market. And so it was challenging there wasn't that many people that more or less pushed themselves into aviation and succeeded. And so right now, there's a large number of people that are retiring, and then there's a small number of people that are experienced anywhere from about 45 to 60 years of age right now. And then you have younger people. However, the younger people haven't had as much time in the business. And, we talked about my being potentially an airline pilot. If I became an airline pilot in 1990, I was looking at 15 years before ever looking into a captain's position
Of
on a
course,
like a 737. And now it's not, I mean, people are going into captain's positions
within a
with like
year.
1,000 hours with like 2 years experience. So it's completely different right now.
It's
Um,
just yeah, it's wild to see, and it changes so quick. Not that I finished my training in 2009, 10 time frame. Worked as a CFI, worked at Hillsborough for a long time, and in 2014, when I started to kind of look at other opportunities and moving outside of instruction and away from Hillsborough, I couldn't get any job. There was nothing available, even your quote unquote entry level, flying in the Grand Canyon or whatever it may be offshore. There's just no opportunity. Um, and those jobs were so important to get the hours to then maybe get to the air medical or whatever route that you want to go. And now it's like the opposite. I mean, these guys can't keep enough pilots, constantly short. The air medical side is constantly short. There's big, big pay raises and bonuses and incentives. And I think that's one hard thing too for helicopters is that at least here in the States, your earnings potential in a helicopter is significantly less than flying an airplane. If you take two 18-year-olds and you put them on a trajectory, one's helicopter and one's airplane, at least here in the United States, that airplane pilot is most likely going to have a bit of a higher earnings potential. It may take longer to get to that point, um, but it seems like helicopter companies down here are finally starting to take note of that, and pay is getting increased. And hopefully with podcasts like this and other platforms on social media can also just get young people excited about aviation again.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I would say that the difference between the airplane and the helicopter is less, or sorry, the what people make is more similar here. I would say probably our fixed wing group would probably be less pay than the
Wow,
airplane fixed wing, and I would say the helicopter would be more paid. So it balances out that they're more similar in this country.
that's interesting. Yeah, it's definitely that's been the hardest part specifically for the air medical companies because the airlines have gotten so desperate that now they're actually paying for helicopter pilots to go to flight training to become airplane pilots, and then their pay long term is fairly significant. Um, but it's just it's an interesting time, and I
People will
hope.
come to me sometimes and they'll say, "Should I be an airplane pilot or a helicopter pilot?" I've always, year after year, I've always said the same thing. Do what you're passionate about and do what drives you, because you'll find that there's money if you're really enjoying what you do. That's always been my lead on to people.
100%. Yeah, and it's not always even about money too. I mean, money, obviously you have to make money to support your family and live your life, but so much of happiness is about being happy in what you're doing. For me personally, I couldn't imagine myself flying an airplane full time because it didn't seem exciting enough, right? Where at least at that young age, excitement was what I was wanting. And that's what helicopters at that time. Now I'm an old guy. I'm thinking, oh man, I should have maybe gone that route. Cause now I'm not into the exciting, part of my life, but it all just kind of ebb and flows. If, uh, to our audience that's getting into aviation, and obviously you've been very successful in both airplanes and helicopters. What is some like the biggest advice that you give young people that are just entering into this industry?
Well, I guess it is what I started to say is the advice: do what you're passionate about, because what you're passionate about, money will follow, opportunities will find you. And, that is what I think that's what we're here to do, is to find ourselves, each one of us. We all have our own path and we all have to realize it. And things will come that our way if we're really, that's the direction we want to go. And so at least I've certainly proven that to myself, that I would say that I've time and time again, I've gone outside of maybe what's normal or what people do, and you find opportunities when you do what you want. That's
Absolutely.
my advice.
Yeah, no, it's really sound advice, and I think sometimes as humans we have an idea of what our life will look like, and then it's always completely different. And in my experience, it's always completely different but better. It just always, if you work hard, and you put yourself in a position to receive luck, because I don't necessarily believe in luck, but I think that you can position yourself to
Yeah.
to receive it. Good things will happen. Final note before we wrap up here. Obviously, you've probably been
I say one
responsible.
more thing. I was just gonna say, economically, people come and they say, "Is this the right time? Lots of people are hiring, or not the right time." I don't think it matters. I think if you want to do something, the timing actually doesn't make any difference. And even economically, everyone runs at their own economics, just because things are up or things are down or what have you. So I always tell people that.
No, 100%. I mean, it's like having kids. Like, you never feel like it's the right time.
That's
I'm
right.
I'm pushing off into a new business venture right now, and I have this anxiety, and I'm like, man, we're so busy right now on what we're doing. Is this smart? Is this not smart? And I feel like, well, I could say that same excuse a year from now, right? We're just going to continue to get busy.
Yeah.
You do have to just kind of pull the trigger sometimes and decide and do what you think is best and what's going to make you happy. Uh,
Sometimes there's a fear of not doing things. And once I had the opportunity to hear our first Prime Minister of Canada ever speak, which was Kim Campbell. I was at this event. She spoke, and then after the event, it was in wintertime, and everyone had asked for a taxi, and I didn't want to go up and stand and talk to her because I felt like I really didn't have anything to say. So as I'm waiting for the taxi to pull up, I see it pull up, and I kind of look over and I catch her eye, and she sees me, and she sees the taxi, and she says to me, "Well, go for it." And at that point, I realized how she became first Prime Minister of Canada. There's opportunity in front of you. What are you doing looking at me? Just step out and take it.
just go.
Yeah, and it was kind of an aha moment a little bit for me.
That's really funny. Uh, so as we wrap up here, undoubtedly you've hired a lot of pilots, I'm sure. What are qualities that you look for in individuals when you're hiring for a pilot to work for you?
Well, I always look for, I mean, gee, that's an open-ended question. Obviously, you want skill. You need people to have a basic skill. And if you're hiring them to work with people, they need to have an ability or an affinity to work with people. I really think that training people is not about the helicopter, and people have to get over how the helicopter flies because they're trying to teach this human being that's sitting next to them, and people need to connect with people. And so I find, yes, skill is definitely important. However, the ability of people to connect and want to teach other people is huge for hiring people.
Specifically on the instruction side, you got to be passionate about teaching because teaching is very challenging, and you have to be able to have. I always thought that I needed like a toolbox for instruction, and I needed to be able to teach one thing 10 different ways because 10 different humans learned it differently. And that was actually kind of the fun of instruction for me. It's like you could be doing the same maneuvers with one student, and then you go out for the next block and you're doing the same set of maneuvers, but you're having to approach it from a different perspective or a different angle because what clicks for student A is not necessarily clicking for student B. And I always found that really interesting. Chinook Helicopters, you're located up in beautiful British Columbia. If people want to get in touch with you, get in touch with your company, if they're interested in becoming a pilot, whether it's fixed wing or helicopter, what is the best way for them to interact with you?
There's a multitude of ways to do that. Someone could feel free to reach out to me by telephone, email. I have a team of people here right at the moment. Angie heads our marketing and all of our sales team. And so any way that you want to reach out would be appreciated, either email or telephone.
It's
And
awesome.
we'd love to hear from anyone who's interested in talking about their training or upgrading needs. And I really appreciate the opportunity that to talk to you today and learn about you.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. It's been awesome and an extreme pleasure. It's the cool part about the podcast for me is I guess I could have suspected it, but again, you do things in life and you expect one thing and it's totally different. And the podcast has been no different. It's the neatest part for me is uh, getting to be able to connect with so many different people within the industry. Not that I wouldn't have the ability to maybe pick up the phone and have conversations with people, but on this podcast form, it gives me access to people that sometimes, you don't always get access to. And so it's really neat. And it's been incredible. It's kind of like, I feel like I get to learn so much too, specifically with me in entrepreneurialism. I'm always very inspired to hear how other business owners do what they're doing and how they've been successful. And I feel like I'm just getting like my little my master's in helicopter aviation by doing the podcast. So I greatly appreciate your time. Again, it's Chinook Helicopters. If you are considering flight training airplanes or helicopters and you're in Canada or outside of Canada, really, Chinook Helicopters could be a good opportunity for you. Bell 47, R44, 206, 505, a lot of cool different platforms, and being able to go out and get diverse training, flying in mountains and getting to learn that is so important. So whenever you're deciding your flight school, make sure you're asking that question. What kind of diversity of training am I able to get? And it seems like with Chinook that you're doing some really neat training and really preparing your pilots to be successful. So Cathy, thank you so much for joining the Helicopter Podcast.
Thank you very much. It was great chatting, and thank you
Yeah.
so much. What a great day.
So much fun. And to our listeners, thank you for listening. Make sure that you're following us on all the social platforms, the Helicopter Podcast, and of course our YouTube, so you can also see it in video. Just don't watch the YouTube when you're driving. That's all I ask. Just keep it on Spotify for now. And to the Vertical Helicast platform, thanks for making the podcast possible. Take care. Hey, podcast listeners. My name is Halsey Schider, and I'm the principal broker and owner of Helicopter. Helicopter is a new age, data-driven, helicopter-specific sales brokerage, bringing helicopter listings to new heights. At Helicopter, we utilize digital positioning, paid advertising, and our large network of industry professionals to move your helicopter quickly and efficiently. Unsure the value of your helicopter? Lucky for you, Helicopter offers a complimentary market evaluation. All you have to do is contact the team today. Are you ready to take your helicopter listing from Mayday to payday? Easy. Fill out the contact information below, and a Helicopter pilot agent will reach out shortly. Helicopter. List it, sell it, done.